The Girl Scouts Canoe Trip. Chapter 3. Setting Off. "A letter for you, Marjorie," said Mrs. Wilkinson 2 days later. "I don't recognize the handwriting." "It's from Miss Phillips," cried Marjorie, as she tore at the envelope. "Oh, I wish I had something to open it with." She looked wildly for her scissors. "Girls with bobbed hair certainly do miss their handiest tool, don't they?" teased Jack. "Well, since you haven't a hairpin, I'll lend you my knife. But I don't see why you don't carry your own scout knife. Oh, Jack, in a dress like this." She glanced in amusement at her dainty, pongee Peter Pan, and laughed at the idea of carrying a heavy penknife in the pocket, which was really intended rather for decoration than for use. In a second, however, the letter was opened, and Marjorie was reading it greedily. News from her captain was always more welcome to the girl than anything else, except the presence of the writer herself. "Let's see it," said Jack. The boy, a scout himself, had once gone on a canoe trip and had camped on a number of occasions. So he was deeply interested in anything that had to do with life in the open. "Well, we are to wear our uniforms and sneakers, and to take along a sweater, a raincoat, a change of underclothing, 3 pairs of stockings, 2 woolen blankets, and our necessary toilette and personal articles, but not any superfluous things that would add to the weight of our bulk of our luggage. And each girl is to take her personal scout equipment, such as mess kit, hand axe, knife, compass, first aid kit, and canteen, field glasses." "What about the tents?" interrupted her brother. "What kinds are they going to use?" "I don't know. Miss Phillips doesn't say a word about them. Maybe I could take your shelter half." "Sorry, but Mr. Remington is going to take us scouts on some sort of a jaunt, so I'm afraid I'll need it myself." "Well, since she didn't mention it, I guess I won't bother. Miss Phillips doesn't forget things, so I suppose she is looking after them herself and leaving the more personal things to us. She doesn't say anything about food either, now that I think of it." "I'll lend you my fly rod," offered the boy. "I guess I won't need that." "What for?" "To beat carpets with, silly. What does one usually do with a fishing rod?" "But we don't know anything about fishing, Jack. You ought to know, after all the pains I took last summer to try to teach you how to cast a fly." "That's true enough," admitted Marjorie. "I hadn't thought of fishing." "What? Do you mean to tell me that you're going to be on the water for 2 weeks, 14 whole days, and you don't expect to do any fishing? Well, if that isn't just like a girl." "But I'll be the only one among all those girls," argued Marjorie. "I don't think any of the rest of them would ever think of such a thing." "Well, what of it? Just think how Ruth would strut around if she were the only one to think of it. Can't you just see her?" "You don't seem to care so much about Ruth, do you, Jack?" said Marjorie, glancing up at her brother through her lashes. Jack studied the figure in the carpet and shifted his weight from one foot to the other. "No," he replied, a bit awkwardly. "I used to, I think I did, but I've been seeing things." Marjorie smiled. "To come back to the subject again," continued Jack, after a moment of silence, during which each had been occupied by the same thoughts. "Think what fun it would be to catch the nice mess of fish for breakfast, and you could show all the other girls how. Honestly, sis, you can handle a fly rod pretty well. However, you can suit yourself. To hear me talk, you might think I was trying to sell you something." "I believe I will take it," said Marjorie. "Thanks for your suggesting it." Jack grunted and strolled over to the window. "Well, I'd better get to work," remarked the girl, "or I won't have any uniform finished in time." She folded the letter and turned her attention to the neglected sewing in her lap. "Speaking of the angels," muttered Jack in an undertone, "look who's here." "Jack, do be careful," warned his mother from the other side of the room. It was Ruth Henry who appeared at the gate. "Hello, everybody," called the visitor, walking in unannounced and making no attempt to give Mrs. Wilkinson a less familiar greeting. "Here for Miss Phillips, Marge." "Yes. I wonder if she said the same thing in my letter she did in yours," said Ruth. "Let's read each other's." "I'd rather not," replied Marjorie coolly. "I don't care to have anyone read my personal letters except Mother." "Excuse me for living." Then, spitefully, "Oh, of course your mother reads John Handley's." "She may if she wishes," declared Marjorie, giving her attention to her sewing. "Marge, I want to ask a favor," continued Ruth in a different tone. "Will you lend me your canoe this afternoon?" Marjorie frowned slightly. She had other plans. "If you get back by 4:30, she said. "Jack promised to give me a few pointers about paddling." Ruth drummed with her fingers against the arm of her chair while she considered the proposition. In reality, she had entertained no desire to keep the canoe for more than an hour, but when she perceived that by so doing she might retard Marjorie's progress towards proficiency in the handling of it, she was overwhelmed by a desire to keep it all afternoon. "I did want it till supper time, but it doesn't matter, I guess." "Was it something special?" "Rather. Mother wanted to send a basket of fruit to our washwoman's little boy. He's sick, you know, over near the dam. But perhaps I can walk." "Oh, no, you take it, Ruth, unless you could get Harold's car." "It's being oiled this afternoon, but really I don't think I'd better." "It's more important that you practice up for the races." "Don't be foolish, Ruth," put in Mrs. Wilkinson, who had been listening to the conversation. "Your errand is much more important, anyway. Jack can probably take Marjorie tomorrow." "No, I can't either," said the boy. "It's a baseball practice." "Well, then sometime before Monday. There's lots of time yet." But when Sunday came, Marjorie realized that there had not been a single opportunity for her to carry out her plan. 3 days of rain and more baseball practices had entirely prevented its execution, and Monday morning found her no further advanced than she had been the preceding week. "Anyway," she remarked to Ruth as they started together on their journey towards the Silver Creek, "we've had so much rain these last few days that we oughtn't to have any during the next 2 weeks, and that will be a blessing." When Ruth and Marjorie reached the boathouse in the woods, where they had inspected the canoes the week before, they found the rest of the party had arrived before them. Each scout, including the captain, was dressed in the official uniform of the organization, and the contrast of the khaki color against the green background of the woods and the water made a very pleasing picture. The canoes were lined up at the same place on the shore in readiness for them, but they were now upright and looked so inviting that the girls longed to get into them right away. Nearby on the ground was piled their miscellaneous equipment, and when the scouts saw what a quantity there was, they protested to their captain that if they crowded so much stuff into the canoe, there would be no room for themselves. "We can never get all that in," cried Ethel. "It is impossible." "I thought we were to travel light," remarked Ruth. Miss Phillips exchanged amused glances with Michael, but she did not argue the point. "Just wait till you watch Michael and me do the packing," she said. "But remember, there are 5 canoes. Oh, that reminds me, you haven't looked at the names on them yet." "That's so," cried Marjorie, running towards the canoes and leaning down to examine them. "Did you get my letter in time?" "Yes, indeed. Now each scout can find her own." "There's the Ariel," cried Frida, the first to discover hers. "I think that's an awfully pretty name, Miss Phillips." "And here's the Water Witch," announced Ruth. "I've found the Sprite," called Ethel, "only I wish it weren't so close to the next canoe. I can hardly see the letters." "I can't find the Firefly," wailed Alice. "Are you sure you got that name on it, Captain?" "Well, that must be it, Alice," said Marjorie, "for here's the Will-o'-the-Wisp, and that's the only one left." "True enough," admitted the other, And here's the name as plain as anything. I couldn't see it for looking at it. Did any of you girls get a chance to practice what I told you last week? Asked Miss Phillips. I suppose you did, Marjorie. No, I didn't. The girl flushed slightly and glanced questioningly at Ruth, in the hopes that she might explain the reason, but Ruth said nothing. She had no intention of coming to Marjorie's rescue. It rained so much, and I had my uniform to finish besides. Marge doesn't need practice, said Ruth. She'll get the cup anyway, without trying. Your uniform looks lovely, said Miss Phillips. In fact, they all do. I think you girls are all to be congratulated. All this time the captain had been distributing the folded tents and cooking utensils and the food supplies into 5 piles. Now I believe I'm ready, announced the captain after a few minutes more work, when the big pile had completely disappeared. I'm going to pack our canoes and let you all watch. Then you may all set to work at yours, and after they are finished, I will inspect them to make sure they are all right. Naturally, a neat and orderly person, the captain, having made a little study of the methods of loading a canoe for an extended cruise, was able to pack her equipment as efficiently as any experienced canoeist. And in addition, she had selected a greater amount for her own canoe than for any of the girls. She unfastened a bundle containing a number of waterproof bags and proceeded to pack in a part of the perishable foods from the supply of flour, sugar, tea, rice, oatmeal, salt, bacon, and other things. Next, she stowed away her personal clothing into another sack. You can put all the bottom things you are least likely to need, and the things you might want at any time you can put on the top, so that you won't have to dump everything out to get what you need, she explained. Now, when you draw these strings and tie the top securely, your clothing will keep nice and dry. I mean, even if you should upset, it will float after a fashion. Keep your sweaters and raincoats out so that you can put either one on at any time. You can roll the sweater up inside the raincoat to keep it dry and put them under the seat or in the most convenient place. My blankets, bed sack, tent, and mosquito net will go in another sack. Of course, you'll need to put the heaviest, bulkiest sacks in the middle of your canoe, where they will act as a ballast, and see to it that the weight balances properly. See, my load is now too heavy on this side, and that tips the canoe, but I'll put this sack over there to even things up. There, that rides splendidly, doesn't it? These cooking utensils we'll put in wherever we can find a place. Now I'm about ready. It didn't take long, did it? With a little practice, we'll be able to pack up in no time. Suppose you all start and do yours. The girls had watched the process with increasing admiration until everything, even including Frida's things, were completely stowed away. Wonderful, cried Marjorie. Pretty soft for Frida, muttered Ruth. Now we've got to do it all for ourselves. They all set to work immediately, but the results were not so gratifying or so quickly obtained. Alice and Florence even succeeded in getting their heaviest load in the bow, and as soon as Miss Phillips discovered this, they were obliged to take everything out and begin all over again. Finally, all were ready, and one by one the canoes were pushed off from the shore. Miss Phillips and Frida, in the Ariel, took the lead. At first, most of the girls' strokes were rather uneven, and now and then a splash of water would fall into a canoe. They were all very quiet, so absorbed were they in their new occupation and in the scenery on either side. "Is it as pretty as this all the way down?" asked Marjorie. "Even prettier sometimes, I believe," answered Miss Phillips. "Oh, look at this big spider," cried Lily. "It's so horrid." "Only a water bug, I guess," said the captain reassuringly. "And that reminds me, girls, I should like you to keep observation books. Every plant and animal, insect, reptile, fish, flower, in fact, anything interesting in nature that you can identify, please put down. Then, at the end of each day, we shall see who has been the most observant." "Well, you can all put down that water spider," offered Lily generously. "I'm glad to give him away." "Miss Phillips," asked Marjorie, "are we to pass any merit badge tests or do any special work in scouting on this trip?" "Yes, it is in my hopes that every girl will pass the sailor's test before we reach Silverton. Indeed, I have so arranged the schedule that we remain one morning at a certain camping spot in order to give the test, because it would be more difficult to do it at Silverton among so many strangers." "And what does the test include?" asked Ruth, always interested in a new chance to win distinction for herself. "Oh, it has to do with swimming and landing a canoe and tying knots and just lots of other things. You can study it up in your handbooks before we take the test." "I wish I was the first class scout," observed Alice. "Would there be any hope of my passing that test on the trip?" "I hardly think so," replied the captain. "But you can do that as soon as you get back to Miss Allen's in the fall." As the heat increased towards the middle of the day, the girls paddled more slowly, often merely directing the course of their canoe and allowing the current to do the rest. Miss Phillips did not urge them forward. She realized how weary they were by their eagerness to stop for lunch. "Be sure to land carefully," she told them. "We don't want any upset canoes." "Save the food, at least," laughed Florence. "I'm simply starved." Their lunches for that day had been packed by their mothers and savored more of a picnic than of a camping out. There was chicken salad and dainty nuts and cheese sandwiches, iced tea in thermos bottles, and homemade layer cake. "And isn't it great to be on land again?" commented Ruth. "Why, my legs are stiff already." "Is our afternoon trip long?" asked Doris, in a tone that might signify her willingness to remain there. "Oh, hours and hours," joked Miss Phillips. "No, it isn't really. We must stop early so that we will have lots of time to put up our tents and cook supper before dark, since this is our first experience. Not more than an hour and a half, and then watch for a cedar grove. See who can find it." "The will-o'-the-wisp will discover it," cried Marjorie. "Just watch." So hungry had the girls been that there was almost no food to pack away, and soon they were on their way again, taking care, however, to exchange positions in the canoes. Ruth was glad of an easier pull, and though she would not admit that she was tired, when Marjorie announced that she thought she espied the grove they were looking for, it was a very welcome sound to Ruth's ears. In less than 5 minutes, the girls were paddling up to the shore, looking for a convenient place to land.